Animation has been called the application of the insane to the inanimate. That's maybe a bit harsh. What it is really is a particular kind of movie magic, making still images come alive through the painstaking process of photographing them a frame at a time, over and over and over again. This is the story of that application in New Zealand, and the people who made it happen in our own way.
I always joke that animation is about the only thing I ever actually learnt to do. Everything else, I just make it up as I go along.
That was the whole story of animation in New Zealand, they can do, and if you didn't have it, you built it.
I think that's kind of beautiful in a way, in that indigenous thing about Kiwi art, and especially in the music and filmmaking, it's all been made up.
Oh yeah, they're all crazy. Absolutely. Whatever style of animation. Computer animators, wacko. Claymation, wackos. 2D animators, cell drawing animators. They're all wackos. It's great. I found my family.
What makes a good animator? I don't know. Keep your pencil sharp, that's it.
The range of personalities in animators is astonishing. It goes from all ends of the spectrum. You get very quiet people who just like to work on their own and do their work, and sometimes they do the wildest animation. And you get other people who are basically frustrated actors who take it out on the pencil and get that on the page.
Ah, animators, eh? It's been said, not by me, that you wouldn't have animation without animators. Now, that might strike you as just a bit obvious, but if you think about it, what they mean is, if there wasn't a special kind of artist who's dedicated to sitting in a lonely room and drawing, and drawing, and drawing for hour after hour after hour, well, you would have me for a start. And you wouldn't have so much more, because almost everything you see on a screen these days has the animator's touch somewhere. And that's a far cry from how it all began. One of our most famous artists, Len Lye, was also our first animator. The year is 1929. The country of manufacture might be England, but this is Tusalava, the first animated film by a New Zealander. Len Lye was working for a London animation company when he made this 9-minute film, and he used their equipment to animate traditionally, photographing over 4,000 drawings. It's a familiar story with animators, cobbling art and commerce together. But Len Lye was fascinated by motion, kinetic art, and it wasn't long before he had created something entirely new, scratching and painting directly onto film stock.
With my drive to compose motion in film, not worrying about the story side of it, why I started to scratch on film and make designs on film, but later, 1935, I made the first direct film with sound.
That film was A Colour Box, one of a number of experimental films Len Lye made for the British Post Office. Screened as cinema advertisements, the films made quite an impact in pre-war Britain. They were often more talked about than the main feature. The painted and scratched frames turned the film strip into a collection of tiny works of art. And in Len Lye's work, you can see a foreshadowing of techniques that wouldn't find their way into mainstream animation until many years later. Like this mixing of live action and drawing in Rainbow Dance. But Len Lye was really an international artist, our first exported animator. Whatever his influence in the wider world, animation in 1940s New Zealand wasn't feeling much of it. Instead, stop-motion animation was growing in the hands of self-taught filmmakers. Fred O'Neill was one of the pioneers of animation in this country in the 1940s. What began as a hobby turned into full-time work for the National Film Unit. Fred's field was stop motion, physically animating puppets or plasticine and clicking a frame on every tiny movement.
It allows all the aspects of filmmaking, only of course in miniature. It doesn't matter if you wanted a castle or a ship, you can make these quite easily. Even the actors themselves can be made, and best of all, of course, they work for no wages at all.
Wages? Money would be the least of the worries for some of Fred's actors. But that's show business, folks. Back in the 1940s and 50s, short animations like Fred's Plastophobia were being screened in our cinemas, sometimes before classics from the Disney studios. Maybe a bit of a contrast, like, say, having a vaudeville show open for Swan Lake. But although he probably didn't plan it, Walt Disney was about to kickstart New Zealand's commercial animation industry. Alrighty, yes sir, you're a great audience, no question. Now stop me if you've heard this one. No, I'll take a look, don't stop me, I hate that. But seriously, folks, there were 2 Scotsmen and an American. But it's true. These 3 men all migrated to New Zealand. Bob Morrow, Sam Harvey and John Ewing. And they all brought with them classical animation skills learned from Disney studios. Bob Morrow and Sam Harvey were trained in England by Disney animators, and Bob was the first to come out here. And the first to find that cobbling together an animation studio in 1940s New Zealand required a special kind of creative engineering, Meccano and all. One of the first recruits to his Levin studio was his future partner, Mike Walker.
Bob's whole filmmaking philosophy was very much geared to the educational film. There was a sort of Scottish socialist philosophy that imbued him with the idea that animation had a great power that could be used in the field of educational film.
That vision gave us our first hand-drawn cartoon film in 1952.
If we must cut down a tree, it is up to us to see that another one is growing.
And then our first homegrown cartoon character in this film, produced to mark the International Geophysical Year in 1958.
Until, with the discoveries of the Americas, Australia and New Zealand and Antarctica, mankind at last knew the full shape of the land.
Morrow Productions was up and rolling, just as fellow Scot Sam Harvey was thinking that Auckland might be ready for some competition in animation.
I decided to have a go. Might make some money. There was nobody else doing it. Bob Morrow didn't count as far as I was concerned. I'm not being naughty about Bob Morrow, but he was somebody in the distance like Wellington, you see.
Harvey Productions came online in the early 1960s, ready for television and the first animated commercials.
Nectar, fruit and fruit juices were always on Sundays from then on. Panera.
And at the same time in Los Angeles, another animator was thinking about emigration, even though he'd loved the 10 years he'd worked in the Disney studios.
Oh, it was magic. I'd walk down the halls and I'd pass someone and I'd look at them, oh, I wonder if I'd seen that guy's name, on the screens. I just, my mind was just blown. I think that's probably why I made what could be called a success. I became an animator, and I became a Disney animator.
But John Ewing was a Disney animator with a hankering to see the world.
Lovely here.
Of course it's lovely.
New Zealand, as I say, television was new, and of course animated commercials were a part of the scene.
So the influence of these 3 very different men established the New Zealand commercial animation industry. An influence that's still felt today. For example, in John Ewing's classic touch on the character of the recent lotto call.
Cheerio, here I go on my way. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye.
It's one of those great cycles. Today is homage to the early years, but as those early years marched on, there was another revolution coming.